Marcus Chin pushed through the crowded streets of New Tokyo's spaceport district, his lunch break rapidly disappearing like credits from a broken account. The morning had been brutal, 3 back-to-back shifts at the cargo loading docks, moving containers that weighed more than his entire apartment. His supervisor, a particularly unpleasant Regelian with too many tentacles and an attitude problem, had made it clear that taking longer than 30 minutes for lunch would result in docked pay. The sandwich shop was packed, as usual. Earth food had become something of a novelty in the Galactic trade hub, and Marcus often found himself waiting behind aliens who pointed excitedly at simple ham and cheese combinations like they were examining ancient artifacts. Today was no different, except for the small, hunched figure sitting alone in the corner booth. She was clearly ancient, her bluish-gray skin marked with the deep ridges that came with extreme age in her species. Marcus wasn't entirely sure what race she was. The galaxy held thousands of sentient species, and despite Earth's recent inclusion in the Galactic Federation, humans were still learning to distinguish between them all. Her clothes were simple, almost threadbare, and she sat with the careful stillness of someone conserving energy. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't her appearance, but the way others avoided her. Aliens who had been chatting loudly suddenly found reasons to move to different tables. A group of Centaurian merchants actually got up and left their meals half-finished when she shuffled past their table. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable, fear mixed with disgust. Marcus had seen it before, back on Earth before first contact. The way people treated the elderly, the homeless, anyone who didn't fit their neat categories of useful or profitable. It had always made his stomach turn, and, apparently, prejudice wasn't limited to humans. He ordered as usual, a simple turkey sandwich with mustard, and noticed the old woman still sitting alone. The shop owner, a cheerful human named Bob who'd relocated to the spaceport to capitalize on the authentic Earth cuisine craze, was already calling out orders. Marcus grabbed his sandwich and small bag of chips, then made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of heading back to work, he walked over to the old woman's table. Up close, he could see she was even frilier than he'd initially thought. Her large, dark eyes held a depth that spoke of centuries, maybe millennia of experience. She looked up at him with surprise, then something that might have been wariness. "Excuse me," Marcus said, keeping his voice gentle. "I couldn't help but notice you're sitting here alone. Would you like to share my lunch? I've got more than enough." The old woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, Marcus wondered if he'd committed some terrible cultural faux pas. Maybe offering food was insulting in her culture, or perhaps she was from a species that considered eating in public taboo. But then, she spoke, her voice like whined through ancient trees, carrying accents from languages that predated human civilization. "You offer food to me? A stranger? Why not?" Marcus sat down across from her, unwrapping his sandwich. Everyone deserves a good meal, and some company. He tore the sandwich in half, placing the larger portion in front of her along with the unopened bag of chips. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus Chun." The old woman stared at the food as if it were a puzzle she couldn't solve. My name is HFY. But most call me grandmother, if they call me anything at all." "Well, grandmother HFY," Marcus said with a smile. "Dig in. Bob makes the best turkey sandwiches this side of the Orion Arm." As HFY took a careful bite, Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly. When was the last time she'd eaten? The thought made him angry, not at her, but at a galaxy that could allow someone so obviously in need to go hungry, while cargo ships full of exotic delicacies passed through the station daily. She paused, seeming to search for words. "This is very good. Very kind." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, Marcus making small talk about the weather controls on the station and the constantly changing roster of ships coming through the docks. HFY listened intently, occasionally asking questions about his work, his life on Earth, his family. "Do you have children?" she asked as they finished the meal. "Someday, maybe," Marcus said. "Right now I'm just trying to make enough to bring my parents up from Earth. They've never been off-world, and I think they'd love to see what's out here." "Family is precious," HFY said, and something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. There was a sadness there, deep and old. "Never take it for granted. Marcus's wrist communicator chimed, reminding him that his break was nearly over. "I have to get back to work," he said apologetically. "But this was nice. Maybe I'll see you around." Zara-THYSS nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Marcus Chun, who shares sandwiches with strangers, you have given this old woman more than food today. You have given her hope that kindness still exists in this vast galaxy." As Marcus walked back toward the docks, he felt oddly moved by the encounter. It hadn't been anything special, just lunch with a lonely old woman. But something about her had struck him deeply. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, like she was seeing something he didn't even know was there. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for the first time in 300 years. Representatives from every major civilization crowded into the massive chamber on Nexus Prime, their varied forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. Some species communicated through color changes, others through harmonic frequencies that made the air itself vibrate, and a few used pheromone releases that required special atmospheric processors. At the center of it all sat the High Chancellor, a towering crystalline being whose species had overseen galactic politics for millennia. His faceted form caught and reflected the lights from 1,000 different worlds, creating prismatic patterns that somehow conveyed his deep concern. "The footage has been verified," announced Security Director Kethvar, a reptilian being whose scales shifted from deep blue to worried purple. 17 different surveillance systems captured the same event. A human male, designation Marcus Chun, approached the Eternal Empress voluntarily and offered food. A ripple of disbelief passed through the assembly. The Vorthan delegate, a gaseous being contained within an environmental suit, released what the translators interpreted as profanity in 14 languages simultaneously. "Impossible," hissed the draconian representative, her serpentine form coiled in agitation. "No one approaches the Empress without invitation. No one has dared for 5,000 years." High Chancellor Prism Thane projected images into the center of the chamber. The holographic display showed Marcus Chun walking across the sandwich shop, sitting down at Zara-THSS's table, and sharing his meal. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence. "The human shows no recognition protocols," observed the Centaurian Trade Minister, his forearms gesturing in patterns that indicated extreme confusion. "No security sweeps, no formal approach procedures, no tribute offerings." He simply sat down. "And she accepted," whispered the Andromedan cultural attaché, her ethereal form flickering with shock. "The Eternal Empress, who has refused formal banquets from emperors and rejected ceremonial feasts from entire civilizations, accepted food from an unknown human dock worker." The chamber erupted in debate. For most species present, the Eternal Empress was either legend or nightmare, depending on their civilization's history. Some knew her as the being who had united the galaxy under a single government over 10,000 years ago, ending the catastrophic wars of annihilation. Others remembered her as the implacable force who had crushed rebellion after rebellion, always appearing just when conquest seemed certain, turning the tide with powers that bordered on the divine. But all of them knew one thing. She was the most powerful being in the galaxy, and she had disappeared 3,000 years ago after declaring that the galaxy had grown soft and complacent under her rule. "The implications are staggering," stated the Regellian senator, his tentacles writhing in patterns that suggested deep thought. "If she has returned, if she is taking an interest in galactic affairs again, the human must be eliminated immediately," declared the hegemony representative, a militaristic species that had ruled through conquest before the Empress's first unification. "Before he can become a catalyst for her return to power." "No." The voice cut through the chamber like a blade, causing several species to involuntarily retreat. High Chancellor Prism Thane's crystalline form blazed with light. "We will not repeat the mistakes of the Signan Empire. They tried to eliminate those the Empress favored. She erased their entire star system from existence." The silence that followed was deafening. Meanwhile, back on the trade station, Marcus was completely unaware of the galactic crisis his lunch had triggered. He'd finished his shift and was walking through the merchant quarter, browsing stalls selling goods from across the galaxy. Most of it was far beyond his budget, but he enjoyed looking at the incredible diversity of art, technology, and culture that flowed through the station. He paused at a stall selling Andromedan crystal sculptures, admiring the way they seemed to capture and hold light. The merchant, a being that looked like a living constellation, noticed his interest. "Beautiful work from the seventh ring," the merchant said through its translator. "Each piece contains actual starlight, harvested from the birth of new suns." "How much?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer would be disappointing. "For you, human friend, only 50,000 credits." Marcus laughed ruefully. "That's about 10 years' salary for me. But they're beautiful." The merchant's form shifted, stars rearranging in what might have been curiosity. "You are the human from the footage, yes? The one who fed the old woman." Marcus blinked in surprise. "How do you know about that?" Instead of answering, the merchant carefully selected one of the smaller crystals and held it out. "Please, take this. No charge." "I can't accept that," Marcus protested. "It's worth more than I make in a year." "You showed kindness to one who needed it," the merchant said. "In my culture, such actions create debts that must be honored." "Please." Confused but touched, Marcus accepted the crystal. It felt warm in his hands and seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As he walked away, he didn't notice the other merchants watching him with expressions ranging from awe to terror. Word was spreading through the station. The human who had shared food with the old woman who some of the older aliens were beginning to suspect might be more than she appeared, was being treated like a celebrity. Shop owners offered him discounts, service workers bowed respectfully, and everywhere he went, beings watched him with a mixture of curiosity and reverence that made him deeply uncomfortable. It was during dinner at his small apartment that Marcus first realized something was seriously wrong. His door chime rang, and he opened it to find 3 beings in the formal robes of the Galactic Council standing in his hallway. "Marcus Chun of Earth," said the lead figure, a tall, elegant being with features that seemed to shift and flow like liquid silver. "I am Ambassador Veltar of the Diplomatic Corps. We need to speak with you immediately." "Did I do something wrong?" Marcus asked, genuinely concerned. "I pay my taxes, I follow station regulations." "On the contrary," Ambassador Veltar said as they entered his modest apartment, looking around with what seemed like professional assessment. "You may have done something monumentally right. Tell us about the old woman you shared lunch with today." Marcus couldn't sleep. He'd spent the night pacing his small apartment, the crystal sculpture from the Andromedan merchant casting strange patterns of light on his walls. The diplomatic team had left him with more questions than answers, and a formal invitation written on what appeared to be crystallized starlight. The invitation was simple: "Join me for breakfast tomorrow. Same place. Your friend, Z." Your friend, Z. As if sharing a sandwich made them friends. As if the most powerful being in galactic history, if the diplomats were to be believed, would consider a human dock worker a friend. Marcus arrived at Bob's sandwich shop early, hoping to get there before the breakfast crowd. He found Zara THYSS already sitting in the same corner booth, looking exactly as she had the day before, frail, elderly, and completely ordinary. Except now Marcus knew that ordinary was the last thing she was. "You came," she said as he approached, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. "Of course I came," Marcus replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Though I have to admit, I'm a little confused about who you actually are." Zara THYSS tilted her head, those ancient eyes studying him carefully. "Who do you think I am? According to the Galactic Council, you're the Eternal Empress, the being who united the galaxy and then disappeared 3,000 years ago." They seemed pretty convinced about it. "And what do you think about that?" Marcus looked at her, really looked. Beneath the apparent frailness, he could see something else now that he knew to look for it. A weight to her presence, a sense of vast experience and carefully controlled power. But, more than that, he could see loneliness. "I think you're someone who's been alone for a very long time," he said finally. "And, yesterday, for maybe the first time in centuries, someone treated you like a person instead of a legend." Zara THYSS was quiet for a long moment. "The council told you to stay away, didn't they?" "Actually, they offered me a fortune to keep having lunch with you. Apparently, they're terrified that if I don't, you'll get angry and start destroying solar systems." To his surprise, Zara THYSS laughed, a sound like silver bells in a gentle wind. "They always did lack imagination." "Yes, Marcus Chun, I am what they call the Eternal Empress. Though I prefer Zara Thyss, the name my parents gave me before I became a symbol instead of a person. Bob appeared at their table, looking nervous. What can I get you folks today? 2 breakfast specials, Marcus said. And Bob? Whatever you're thinking right now, stop it. She's just a customer who likes good food. Bob nodded quickly and hurried away, but Marcus could see him stealing glances from behind the counter. You're handling this well, Zara Thyss observed. To be honest, I'm not sure it's really hit me yet, Marcus admitted. I mean, yesterday you were just a lonely old woman. Today you're apparently the most powerful being in the galaxy. But you're still the same person who thanked me for sharing a sandwich, so you're treating me the same way, Zara Thyss finished. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Their breakfast arrived, simple eggs, toast, and coffee that smelled like Earth mornings. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Zara Thyss spoke again. Tell me about humanity, she said. Your species is new to the galactic community. What do you think of what you found out here? Marcus considered the question seriously. It's amazing. The diversity, the technology, the art, and culture from thousands of different worlds. But, sometimes I think we've lost something. On Earth, before first contact, we had this ideal about exploring space to bring people together, to find common ground with other species, and build something better than any of us could create alone. And instead we found a galaxy where everyone's already settled into their roles, where humans are the newcomers who do manual labor, where different species have stereotypes about each other that they've held for millennia, where someone like you can sit alone in a restaurant because everyone's too afraid to approach. Zara Thyss leaned back in her chair, studying him. The galaxy was very different when I ruled it directly. There was order, unity, peace. But it was peace enforced through fear of my power. When I stepped back, I hoped the various species would learn to cooperate on their own. What happened instead? What always happens? They formed cliques and hierarchies. The strong dominated the weak. Innovation stagnated. The council maintains basic order, but there's no growth, no real progress toward becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. Marcus frowned. So why stay hidden? Why not take control again? Because, Zara Thyss said sadly, ruling through fear isn't ruling at all. It's just delayed rebellion. Every civilization I conquered, every world I brought into line through demonstrations of power, they obeyed because they had to, not because they chose to. The moment I showed weakness, or the moment someone stronger came along, it would all collapse. Then what's the answer? I don't know, she admitted. I've watched this galaxy for 3,000 years, hoping to see something that would give me hope. Some sign that the various species could learn to truly cooperate, to see past their differences, and work toward common goals. And yesterday? Zara Thyss smiled. Yesterday, a young human saw an old woman sitting alone and decided she needed company. Not because he had to, not because he was ordered to, not because he hoped to gain anything from it, just because it was the kind thing to do. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. It wasn't anything special. That, Zara Thyss said firmly, is exactly what made it special. You didn't even think about it. Kindness was just your default response. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the restaurant's windows, Marcus could see military vehicles surrounding the building. Figures in combat armor were taking positions, and the street was being cleared of civilians. The council, Zara Thyss said with a sigh. They've decided that our conversation is a threat to galactic security. Are we in danger? You're not, she said, standing up. But I suspect our breakfast is about to be interrupted by some very nervous politicians. As if on cue, the restaurant door burst open and a squad of heavily armed guards entered, followed by High Chancellor Prism Thane himself. The crystalline being's form was blazing with agitated light, and Marcus could feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees. The single word hung in the air like a physical force. The heavily armed guards, beings from species that had conquered entire star systems, took involuntary steps backward. High Chancellor Prism Thane's crystalline form dimmed noticeably, and several of his facets actually cracked under the pressure of what he was hearing. Marcus, sitting at the table with half a piece of toast in his hand, found himself in the surreal position of watching the most powerful being in the galaxy refuse an order on his behalf. Eternal Empress, the Chancellor tried again, his harmonics careful and respectful. The Council is concerned about the security implications. The Council, Zarathus interrupted, her voice still carrying that impossible authority, is concerned that I might remember why I found their leadership inadequate 3,000 years ago. They're worried that spending time with someone who treats me as an equal rather than a weapon might give me ideas. She turned to Marcus, and, suddenly, she was just Zarathus again, the lonely old woman who'd been grateful for shared lunch. I'm afraid our breakfast is going to be cut short. But, Marcus, would you like to see something interesting? Before he could answer, she held out her hand. Marcus looked at it, looked at the dozen weapons pointed in their direction, looked at the crystalline chancellor who was radiating what he could only assume was panic, and made a decision that surprised even himself. He took her hand. The world exploded into light and motion. Marcus felt himself lifted, transported, carried through space itself at speeds that should have torn him apart. But, instead of pain or fear, he felt safe, protected by Zarathus's power as they traveled between the stars. When the light faded, they were standing in a place that defied description. They seemed to be at the center of a vast sphere, its walls showing real-time images of thousands of different worlds. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns that formed constantly shifting maps of the galaxy. The air itself sparkled with what looked like condensed information, data streams from every inhabited world flowing in visible currents around them. This is the heart of the galaxy, Zarathus explained, her voice echoing in the impossible space. From here, I can see everything. Every world, every civilization, every choice being made by every sentient being in known space. Marcus turned slowly, trying to take it all in. On one wall, he could see what looked like a trade dispute between two species he didn't recognize. On another, a scientific expedition was discovering new forms of life. Everywhere he looked, the galaxy was alive with activity. It's incredible, he breathed. How do you process it all? Carefully, Zarathus said with a wry smile. And with a lot of patience. Watch this. She gestured, and one of the image streams expanded. Marcus found himself looking at a world he didn't recognize, where two different species seemed to be in the middle of a heated argument. The universal translators built into the space allowed him to understand what they were saying. Your people have been stealing our water resources for generations, one of them was shouting. And your people have been polluting our shared atmosphere, the other replied. We need those industrial processes to maintain our cities. This conflict has been going on for 200 years, Zarathus explained. Each side convinced the other as being unreasonable, both of them right about their grievances, neither willing to look for solutions that might require compromise. Can't the council intervene? They have, 17 times. Each intervention results in temporary peace followed by resumed hostilities. The council treats it as a local problem to be managed rather than solved. She gestured again, and the image shifted to show what looked like a massive construction project in space. But watch this. On the screen, Marcus could see representatives from both species working together on what appeared to be an orbital platform. They were sharing tools, helping each other with technical problems, and actually seemed to be enjoying each other's company. What changed? Marcus asked. A human engineer was assigned to the project, Zarathus said. Someone from your merchant marine who suggested they build a water reclamation and atmosphere processing station in orbit. Both species contribute resources, both benefit from the results, and they have to work together to maintain it. Another gesture, another image. This time Marcus saw what looked like a classroom where young beings from a dozen different species were learning together. A human teacher, Zarathus explained before he could ask. She suggested that if different species learned together as children, they might not develop the prejudices their parents held. The council had dismissed the idea for centuries as impractical integration. Image after image flowed past, humans serving as mediators in trade disputes, human scientists collaborating with alien researchers to solve problems neither could handle alone, human artists creating works that celebrated the diversity of galactic civilization rather than just their own culture. Your species, HFY said quietly, has been in the galactic community for less than 50 years. And already, you're changing things. Not through conquest or superior technology or demonstrations of power, but through simple human decency. Marcus felt overwhelmed. We're just doing what seems right. Exactly. And that's what makes you unique. Most species, when they join the galactic community, either try to dominate or get dominated. They look for their place in the existing hierarchy. Humans just ignore the hierarchy and focus on the problems. She turned to face him fully, and Marcus could see something like hope in her ancient eyes. Yesterday, when you offered to share your lunch with me, you weren't thinking about galactic politics or power structures or the fact that I might be important. You just saw someone who needed kindness. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, HFY said firmly. Anyone from your species might have. But you're the first species I've encountered in 10,000 years of observation where that would be true. The implications of what she was saying began to sink in. You think humanity could change the galaxy? I think humanity already is changing the galaxy. The question is whether the Council will allow it to continue, or whether they'll try to force your species into the same old patterns of dominance and submission that have kept this galaxy stagnant for millennia. As if summoned by her words, the space around them began to shimmer. High Chancellor Prism Thane materialized in the heart of the galaxy, his crystalline form radiating urgent light patterns. Eternal Empress, he said, his harmonics tight with stress. The Council demands an explanation. You have violated 17 treaties by bringing an unauthorized alien into the heart of the galaxy. You have disrupted normal diplomatic channels. And now there are reports of unrest on 15 different worlds as news of your return spreads. HFY looked at Marcus, then back at the Chancellor. Summon the full council, she said. It's time for a conversation that's been delayed for far too long. And the human? The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Council had never been so full. Representatives from every member species crowded into the massive chamber on Nexus Prime, while countless more participated via quantum link from their home worlds. The air thrummed with translated conversations in thousands of languages, creating a symphony of confusion and concern that made the universal translator strain to keep up. Marcus stood beside HFY at the center of it all, feeling completely out of place in his simple work clothes among beings who wore the finest diplomatic regalia from across the galaxy. Some of the assembled representatives were towering crystalline entities that refracted light in impossible ways. Others were gaseous beings contained in elegant environmental suits, or energy patterns that existed only as organized electromagnetic fields. A few were so alien that their methods of communication required specialized translation devices that hadn't been used in centuries. But they all had one thing in common. They were all staring at him. Honored delegates, High Chancellor Prism Thane announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. We are here to address the return of the Eternal Empress to galactic affairs and her association with the human Marcus Chun. A murmur rippled through the assembly. The draconian representative coiled her serpentine form in patterns that suggested deep unease. The hegemony delegate's military bearing was rigid with barely controlled aggression. Even the usually peaceful Centaurian trade ministers seemed agitated. HFY stepped forward, and the chamber fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried easily to every corner of the vast space without amplification. 3,000 years ago, I stepped back from direct rule, because I believe this galaxy could learn to govern itself wisely. I believe that given time and freedom, the various species could find ways to cooperate that didn't depend on fear of my intervention. She paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. I was wrong. The silence that followed was deafening. In 3 millennia, she continued, you have created a system of magnificent stagnation. You maintain order, yes. You prevent wars, mostly. But you have also prevented growth, innovation, real cooperation between species. You have built a galaxy where everyone knows their place, and no one dares to imagine it could be better. The Regellian senator's tentacles writhed in what Marcus had learned to recognize as disagreement. With respect, Eternal Empress, the galaxy is at peace. Trade flows freely. Conflicts are resolved through diplomatic channels. What more could? Marcus, Zara THYSS interrupted, turning to him. Tell them about the water crisis on Kepler 442. Marcus blinked in surprise. They had discussed this during their journey to the heart of the galaxy, but he hadn't expected to be put on the spot in front of the most powerful political body in the galaxy. Well, he began, then cleared his throat and spoke more confidently. Two species sharing the same world, fighting over water rights for 200 years. The Council kept sending mediation teams that would establish temporary truces, but nothing permanent ever got solved. And the solution? Zara THYSS prompted. A human engineer suggested building an orbital water reclamation facility. Both species contribute resources and labor, both benefit from the output. They had to work together to build it, so they ended up talking to each other instead of just arguing through diplomats. The Council, rumbled the hegemony representative, had determined that the resource allocation problem was too complex for a simple engineering solution. No, Marcus said, feeling a flash of irritation. The Council decided that managing the conflict was easier than actually solving it. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Marcus realized he had just contradicted one of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy, but something about the situation made him unable to back down. You want to know what I've learned about galactic civilization? He continued, his voice growing stronger. You have incredible technology. Faster than light travel, planetary engineering, universal translation, medical techniques that can extend life for millennia. You have art and culture and philosophy from thousands of different worlds. You have everything you need to build something amazing. He looked around at the assembled delegates, these beings who commanded the resources of entire star systems. But you've forgotten how to actually talk to each other. Everyone's so focused on maintaining their position in the hierarchy, so afraid of losing status or making mistakes, that you've stopped trying to make things better. You manage problems instead of solving them. You maintain balance instead of creating progress. The Andromedan cultural attaché flickered with what might have been curiosity. And humans are different. Maybe, Marcus admitted. Or maybe we're just too new to know we're supposed to be afraid of each other. When I see a problem, I try to fix it. When I see someone who needs help, I help them. When I see someone sitting alone, I offer to share my lunch. He gestured to Zara THYSS. I didn't know who she was yesterday. I just knew she looked lonely. And, apparently, that was such an unusual reaction that it started a galactic crisis. The human speaks truly, said a new voice. Marcus turned to see a being he didn't recognize, tall, graceful, with features that seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy. I am Speaker NELTHYSS of the Observer Collective. We have watched the human integration into galactic society with great interest. The Observer Collective was legendary, a species so advanced they rarely bothered with galactic politics, preferring to study the development of younger civilizations from a distance. Humans, Speaker NELTHYSS continued, approach problems differently than established galactic species. Where we see complex political situations requiring delicate management, they see practical problems with engineering solutions. Where we see traditional conflicts that must be balanced, they see people who need to be brought together. This is all very philosophical, the draconian representative hissed. But what does the Eternal Empress actually want? Zara THYSS smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, she looked truly happy. I want to offer the galaxy a choice. Continue as you are, stable, managed, stagnant. Or try something new. She gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber, showing scenes from across the galaxy. Humans working alongside aliens on joint projects, solving problems that had seemed intractable for centuries, building relationships that crossed species lines. The human approach isn't perfect, she said. They make mistakes. They sometimes solve the wrong problems or ignore important cultural considerations. But they try. They risk failure for the possibility of success. They choose hope over fear. What are you proposing? High Chancellor Prism Thane asked carefully. A new kind of galactic government, Zara THYSS replied. Not rule through fear or management through bureaucracy, but cooperation based on the radical idea that everyone, every species, every world, every individual, has something valuable to contribute. And if we refuse, the hegemony representative demanded. HFY looked at Marcus, then back at the assembly. Then, I will return to my exile, and Marcus will go back to loading cargo at the spaceport. And in another 3,000 years, you'll still be here, managing the same conflicts and maintaining the same stagnant peace. She paused, her ancient eyes taking in the vast chamber full of the galaxy's most powerful beings. But if you choose to try something new, if you choose to believe that the galaxy can be better than it is, then I offer you my knowledge, my experience, and my power, not as your ruler, but as your partner in building something worthy of the incredible potential I see in all of you. The chamber erupted in debate. Species that hadn't spoken directly to each other in millennia found themselves arguing, discussing, considering possibilities they hadn't imagined in centuries. Marcus watched it all with amazement. Do you think they'll do it? He asked HFY quietly. I don't know, she admitted. But for the first time in 3,000 years, I have hope that they might. As the debate raged around them, Marcus thought about the simple choice he had made the day before, to share his lunch with someone who looked lonely. It seemed impossible that such a small act could lead to this moment, this possibility of galactic transformation. But then, again, maybe that was the point. Maybe the biggest changes didn't come from grand gestures or demonstrations of power. Maybe they came from ordinary people doing ordinary kindnesses, one sandwich at a time. Looking around at the passionate discussions taking place throughout the chamber, seeing species that had barely acknowledged each other's existence for millennia, now actively engaging in debate about their shared future, Marcus began to think that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was ready for something new after all. The human, she said with a smile that held the warmth of stars, is going to help me explain to the galaxy why everything needs to change. Eternal Empress, the Chancellor said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the windows vibrate. The Council requires your presence immediately. The human will be taken into protective custody. HFY looked at Marcus, then at the armed guards, then back at the Chancellor. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made the air itself seem to bend around her words. No. As Marcus recounted the simple story, the three diplomats exchanged glances that seemed heavy with significance. When he finished, Ambassador Veltar leaned forward intently. Mr. Chun, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of galactic security. The being you had lunch with may be the most important individual in the galaxy. And tomorrow, she wants to see you again. He spent the rest of his shift thinking about her words, about family and kindness and the strange ways the galaxy brought people together. He had no idea that his simple act of sharing a sandwich had been witnessed by security cameras monitored across 17 star systems, or that within hours, emergency session meetings would be called in the highest levels of galactic government. All he knew was that he'd done something good, something right, and that felt like enough.